It's summer. Welcome in. Good to have everybody. Good evening. Open up, if you will, to 1 Kings chapter 2. We made it through, I want to say it's verse 12. That's what it was. Verse 12 last time. And I want to apologize up front. The memory verse I told you, I think, was wrong. Sorry. Last time we were together. I was one verse off. I was telling Roy, he'd asked me, I misspoke. And I got it right with Shelby in the bulletin, but that's wrong. So if you want to say 46 tonight, that's okay. I'm not going to hold you to 45. So we are picking up in verse 13 of 1 Kings 2. We're going to finish this off. I think we do. We have 46 verses because that's the last one. I know it's been a couple of weeks, so let's fill in some details here of where we stand in our study of the united period of Israel's kings and kingdoms. Well, the last time we were at the National Convention, and you may recall this is the second one of these that has taken place, where Solomon is made king. Now, this is during David's last days, and he is anointed for a second time by Zadok, is his name, Zadok the priest. Well, the military leaders and all the other sons of David, they've come together and they've agreed, they have pledged their allegiance to the young king. God himself is highly exalted Solomon. I don't immediately recall if it was in the text we read, sometimes in cross-referencing with the parallel passages, it gets a little confusing, jumping back and forth. But it's mentioned, God says that he will exalt him beyond any that has been before him as far as kingships go. Royal majesty that not even Saul, that not even David, Solomon's own father, possessed. Well, those who are Solomon's enemies, however, have not relinquished all hope of seizing the throne. Even though Adonijah, who is Solomon's brother, a little more technical, half-brother, but even though Adonijah has vowed his allegiance to his brother, following the collapse of his attempted coup back in chapter 1 of 1 Kings, Adonijah is in the process of laying the groundwork for a second try at his brother's throne. So that's what we're picking up tonight, and I'm excited about what it is we have to cover. It's quite a bit, and there's some history involved, but I think it's really interesting, and I think and hope you'll find it that way also. So, in verse 12, going back to really just a few verses before that, there's a monumental event. What has just taken place? Not only has Solomon been named the next king of Israel for the second time, but what has occurred within the kingdom of Israel and a little more specifically within this family? Okay, so David's passed away, and that's a huge deal. Massive, tremendous king, wonderful servant of the Lord. He's exiting the scene. The good thing is, he's an old man. He's lived a good life, but man, that's still so sad. A solid king of Israel for 4 decades. And so, you always hope for the best, maybe plan for the worst at times. Whenever a new ruler comes in, you just don't really know until you see what's going to happen. And so everyone's hoping for the best, but we're going to find some interesting occurrences here. You might recall these pieces of final advice that the father gives to his son. David speaks to Solomon, and it's about several people. He says there's some people who need dealing with, and of course he says this is your chance to prove yourself as a man. Basically, I believe in you. You can do great things. Don't forget about the strength behind you. But he mentions in verse 5, remember Joab and what he did. Okay, use your wisdom with this guy. Show kindness, verse 7, to the sons of Barzillai, the Gileadite, who helped him in the first attempted overtake of the throne. And then you have in verses 8 and 9, Shimei. Remember him and how he cursed me. Okay, we're going to talk more about these this evening. So, Dad has now officially exited the scene, and the son is in full control. In verse 13, now, Adonijah, the son of Haggith, and don't forget, this is the half-brother of Solomon. Adonijah, the son of Haggith, of course, Solomon's the son of whom? Aha, very nice. Bathsheba. So Adonijah comes to Bathsheba. Well, that's interesting. The mother of Solomon. So she said, do you come peaceably? And he said, peaceably. Why might she be concerned that he wouldn't come in a peaceable manner? They're family. Family's always enjoying one another's company and looking out for each other's best interest, right? That's my family. No, not really. I wish that were always my family. what's been going on here? We've talked about it a little bit. What is it? All right, so that's going back. Good. That's going right back to what we talked about, right, Kyle, from chapter 1. So really quickly, look back there in the first chapter, verses 5 and 6, if you'll recall, then Adonijah, the son of Haggith, exalted himself, not a very humble character, saying, I will be king. Well, the only issue with that is the royal family has only had plans for Solomon to be the next king. God has only announced for Solomon to be the next king. And it makes sense, doesn't it? He would have to exalt himself to say, no, Israel is mistaken in this. The royal family doesn't understand. God's a little mixed up in this. I'm going to be the next. He's full of himself. And he prepared for himself chariots and horsemen and 50 men to run before him. Like whom does that sound? I think he's learned this somewhere. Like his brother Absalom. And he's going about things the same way. He sees, well, Absalom wasn't successful, but I think I can tweak a thing or two in what he did. I'm going to use a lot of what he did, which was highly successful. And I'm going to be successful in taking my father's throne. Verse 6, maybe a little bit of fault on the part of Dad. And his father had not rebuked him at any time by saying, why have you done so? As great of a man as David was, as great of a king, seems like family life a lot of times is lacking, and probably a good deal of that has to do with the responsibilities of being such an important leader over the nation, so that would make some sense. But, Dad hasn't done his role in keeping his son in check and setting him straight verbally and disciplining him if need be. We're told here he was also very good looking. Does that sound like anybody you know? Other than Marty, who else? Obviously. Does anyone else really matter, though, Kyle? I'm sorry, go ahead. Absalom, you said? Good, yeah. Yeah, that's always the sore one for me, but yeah, you're right. 5 pounds, but who's keeping track of, numbers? Yeah, so, but you're exactly right. So Absalom, he's a very handsome character, and both of these probably take after Dad, right? Dad is a very good-looking gentleman himself. But he's very good-looking, and I'm sure people let him know that on a regular basis. Probably a little bit vain, very conceited, full of himself. His mother had borne him after Absalom. They're close, okay, in age. Well, if you'll skip on down, this coup is found out. It's overthrown. It doesn't happen. And understandably, Solomon, when he's proclaimed king, down in verse 50 of chapter 1, 1 Kings 1, now Adonijah was afraid of Solomon, you think? So he arose and went and took hold of the horns of the altar. Why do you think somebody would do that who's afraid for life back under Jewish culture? First of all, what altar are we discussing here? Huh? I'm sorry, I didn't. Okay, I got you. That is good, Marty. Marty's saying he's on base for those who... You can't tag me, I'm on base. Fingers crossed. Yeah, so that's kind of what this is. The bronze altar, if that helps any. The bronze altar of the tabernacle. Is that an assist in any way? What goes on with the bronze altar? Outside, that's the place where sacrifices are offered up to God. That's the spot where forgiveness is found before deity. So you have that, and then also there are these horns that come out of the altar. We probably recall in Old Testament, and included New Testament also, really, but especially Old Testament writings, horns are symbolic of what? Power. And so with the sacrifices at that altar, you have forgiveness, and with the horns coming out, you have power. And I think splicing those concepts together, you have the power of forgiveness. And I think what he's doing here is symbolizing, hey, this is where the power of forgiveness lies. And I think it's a symbolic plea to, please don't kill me, essentially. Let's try to let bygones be bygones. Have mercy upon me, just as God does with his servants. So I think that makes some sense. So Adonijah, fearful of Solomon, he goes and he takes a hold of the horns of the altar. I think he's begging in this action for forgiveness. And it was told Solomon, saying, indeed, Adonijah is afraid of King Solomon. For look, he's taken hold of the horns of the altar, saying, "Let King Solomon swear to me today that he will not put his servant to death with the sword." And what he does here with this terminology is vow his allegiance to the king, the one against whom he was rebellious just a bit earlier. He says, "I'm not Lord over you. I'm not trying to be king over you anymore. I just want to serve you faithfully under your kingdom." And so it's a plea for his life, and hopeful that Solomon will find it in his heart of hearts to do something about it. He does just that. Verse 52. Solomon said, "Well, if he proves himself a worthy man, this is my word, not one hair of him shall fall to the earth. But if wickedness is found in him, he shall die." So King Solomon sent them to bring him down from the altar, and he came and fell down before King Solomon, again showing his allegiance to the new king. And Solomon said to him, "Go to your house." Not going to do anything. But he has warned him, notice, in verse 52, he must continue to prove himself. "I won't hurt him if he shows himself that he's truly reformed, but if he goes back to this type of behavior, that's it. It's donezo for him." So let's keep that in mind now as we're crossing over into chapter 2. Verse 13. So Adonijah, the son of Haggith, comes to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon. So she said, "Do you come peaceably?" He said, "Peaceably." There's a good reason she asked that question. Chapter 1 was not peaceable at all. "Well, moreover," he said, "I have something to say to you." And she said, "Okay, you can say it." Then he said, "You know that the kingdom was mine." Really? Well, that's interesting. I think he tried to make it his, but in his mind, it probably was his. "You know that the kingdom was mine, and all Israel had their expectations set on me." Really? I'm not really too sure that's the case. I still believe that Adonijah is struggling, that he's the center of his own universe, and he thinks everyone looks at him that same way, but not everybody sees him in the same light that he sees himself. And I think that's the first red flag here. He thinks too highly of himself, just like he does back in chapter 1, which led to his effort to try to take over the kingdom. Well, he continues, "However, the kingdom," in the middle of verse 15, "has been turned over and has become my brother's, for it was his from the Lord." I think you can spot some positivity in that remark. How would you see that? Before he says, "I'm going to be king." Why? Because he wants to be king. And now he's saying, "Oh, no, my brother is king." And why is he king? There you go. And I think you might see some semblance of repentance almost, it sounds like right here. You know, before I was self-driven, and now I just want what God wants, is kind of the way it sounds. Now, the lead-in doesn't really sound that way. It's like there's conflicting information here, and I think for good reason. Verse 16, "Now I ask one petition of you. Do not deny me." When somebody asks, "If you ever do anything for me, if you care about me, if you love me, you will do just one thing that I want done. Will you do it?" And they don't even give a hint as to what that is. Your answer, 99.99 between that and 104% of the time, should be what? No, I need to know what it is before I would agree to that kind of thing. Why wouldn't he just give some hint? Why wouldn't he just put it out there and say what it is? I think he knows deep down this is not a good thing. But he wants it, and he asks Bathsheba for it. "And she said to him, 'Say it.'" I don't know if that's like, okay, yeah, or, well, let's hear it out. I would lean maybe more toward the latter. "Then he said, 'Please speak to King,'" notice the respect. I'm not king, my brother is. "Will you please speak to King Solomon? For he will not refuse you." That may be true. Why would he not refuse this one? That's mama. And that's not like stepmom, or this is like mama, okay? This is 100% his blood. And I would say for the most part, that's probably true. And especially you'll see the respect that the king shows to his mother whenever she comes into his presence. Okay, it says, "Here's what I want, that he may give me Abishag, the Shunammite, as a wife." So I know it's been a few class periods. Let's back up right here, and I hate to have to do this so often, but I feel like you have to, or you just don't understand what's going on in the story. At least I don't. You may be sharper than I. So who's this lady? Abishag the Shunammite. Okay, all right. So she's brought in to help out the king. Anything to add there? Okay, all right. So it's a late wife. He has a number of them, right? And this is a late wife. This one's a little bit different, though, than all the others. So I'm sorry? Okay, good. So back in chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, David was old. King David, show the respect. He was advanced in years, and they put covers on him, but he could not get warm. Doesn't have good circulation in his body, and it's not a good situation. Therefore his servants said to him, let a young woman, a virgin, be sought for our Lord the king, and let her stand before the king, and as was pointed out by Miss Emily, let her care for him. She's going to be kind of a nurse to him. And let her lie in your bosom, that our Lord the king may be warm. And we're told in verse 3, they sought a lovely young woman throughout all the territory of Israel. And they found Abishag, the Shunammite, and brought her to the king. I'm going to guess it's probably a situation kind of like what takes place with Esther under the Persian rule. I think this is probably a kingdom-wide beauty pageant is what takes place. And so this young lady would be very attractive. She's probably the most beautiful woman, young lady in all of Israel. And we're told the young woman was just that. She cared for the king and she served him, but the king did not know her. He was never intimate with this young. It was never about that. It was simply so that quite literally she could help keep him warm, a bodily presence when the covers were not enough. And so as far as we can tell, this woman retains her virginity, even though she's been brought into the king and is one of his concubines. So now we get back to chapter 2 and to our spot. So this one petition from Adonijah to the queen mother, Bathsheba, is for the convincing to take place for Solomon to say, yes, you can have my father's concubine as wife. Okay, there could be a couple of sides to this. The relationship between Abishag and David maritally it's over, right? So death has severed that. Now there is the side of a stepmother, and that's kind of strange. Nevertheless, this is the request that he makes. It makes a lot of sense. He's a somewhat younger fella. What do we know about him? About Adonijah right now? Beautiful. All right, he's a good-looking guy. What do we know about Abishag? Yeah, all right, so that makes a lot of sense. You have two good-looking people and still have their whole lives in front of them, all right? It would sound perhaps still both possessing their virginity. And so, yeah, they can kind of ride off into the sunset maybe together. Okay, verse 18. So Bathsheba said, okay, very well. I will speak for you to the king. That sounds all right to me. So Bathsheba went to King Solomon to speak to him for Adonijah. And the king rose up to meet her. And keep in mind, this is the ruler of the entire land. I think you can tell here how good of a person this is. The king rose up to meet her. That's a great sign of respect. And he bowed down as king to her, to his mother. I think some good principles have been instilled in this young man. He sat down on his throne. Listen to this. He had a throne set for the king's mother. That's how much respect. Mom, you're not going to come into my presence and I sit on a throne, which that's the formal way of handling things. We're going to bring in another throne and you're going to sit on that. That's how important I see you, Mom, in my reign. I still lean on you. I look to you for wisdom. So she sat at his right hand. Then she said, I desire one small petition of you. Do not refuse me. When people ask, just one thing for you to do, and they don't even give you a hint as to what that thing is. 99.8 between that and 104% of the time, what should you always say? No. Okay, so she's taking the same tactics that her stepson did. All right, and then also when when someone says, I just have an eensy, teeny, tiny favor to ask of you, what does that usually mean? Will you move the sun, moon, and stars for me, right? And here's exactly what, it's really, this is a pretty big thing, and we're going to talk more about why here in just a minute. But, one small thing to ask of you, don't refuse me. Please say you'll say yes. And the king said, ask it, my mother. for I will not refuse you. I think he has a lot of confidence in Mom not to ask something foolish, but she's about to pass on the foolish request of her stepson. So she said, very plainly, let Abishag the Shunammite be given to Adonijah, your brother, as wife. Look at King Solomon's reaction. He answered and said to his mother in verse 22, now why do you ask Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah? Ask for him the kingdom also, for he is my older brother. For him and for Abiathar the priest and for Joab the son of Zeruiah. Two pieces to this I want to address. And this one first, he hasn't really asked for that much. He's just asked for a young lady's hand in marriage who appears still to be a virgin. How is that exactly asking for the kingdom? Is maybe Solomon overreacting a little bit here? Go back to, keep your spot right here. Turn to 2 Samuel chapter 12. 2 Samuel 12. And in that spot, we're going to read verse 8. Now, this is when the sin with Bathsheba is taking place. David's still king back then, and it's probably later years. But 2 Samuel chapter 12, and Nathan's come to him, and he's given him the parable, and David's very upset about it, and he says, well, you're the guy in the parable that you want to have such harsh consequences. Well, verse 8, Nathan tells David, and this is, of course, God doing the speaking through the prophet, I gave you your master's house and your master's wives into your arms. I gave you the house of Israel and of Judah, and if this were too little, I would add to you as much more. Now, what does it almost sound like as a suggestion here was the relevance behind God's offering over the spouses of the previous king? What does that seem to be to you as far as significance? Right after making that remark, he says, I gave you, back in chapter 12, verse 8, he says, I gave you the house of Israel and the house of Judah. In the process, I gave you the power of the country. All right, one other one here. Turn to chapter 16, same book, 2 Samuel, where we were not too far back. The 2 Samuel chapter 16, and this time verse 22. This is also when David is really still the official king, but Absalom, David's son, the other handsome devil, he tries to overthrow his father so he can have the kingdom for himself. And in chapter 16, verse 22, we are told that once David and company have vacated the capital city of Jerusalem, and Absalom is there, and he's living in his father's house, and it says they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and Absalom went into his father's concubines, and he made sure to do this in the sight of all Israel. Well, first of all, that's just off in so many ways, number one. But number two, why would you make sure that it's such a public affair, that everybody knows about this all through the land? He's trying to prove a point. Whenever you take over the guy's house, when you take over the guy's household, when you take over and I don't mean this, ladies, disrespectfully. Please don't take it that way. I'm not for this. This is wrong here, okay? But when you take over the ladies in that man's life, then that shows you are the one in control. You are the one in power. Okay, now, if you will, go back to our passage in 1 Kings 2, and whenever his half-brother, Adonijah, through his mom, big tough guy, right? Won't just talk to Bubby himself, but uses Solomon's mom to try to get to the king. And his response is, why do you ask, Mom, for Abishag, or ask Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah? You might as well ask for him the kingdom also. I think he quite literally means that. Because that's what we see in the history that's going on, that if someone takes over the ladies in a previous regime's household, that means he's taken over and he's a part of the new regime. And I believe that shows that this is a second attempted coup on the part of his half-brother, and he's trying to get to the kingdom and to the power that's involved in the kingship through a previous lady in the previous king's household. Now he also ties in here And you're asking this for him, the kingdom, to be handed over to him essentially. And you're also asking this for Abiathar the priest and for Joab the son of Zeruiah. Any ideas as to why he'd bring these two guys into the conversation when really this is about Adonijah? Very good. Now the first time that wasn't the case, right? With Absalom, they remained true. They were loyal to the king. The second time, it did not quite go that way. So look back at chapter 1 again of 1 Kings. Chapter 1, I know it's been several weeks, maybe even a month or so by this point from this one, because we jumped ahead a little bit from 1 Kings 1 or elsewhere. But 1 Kings 1, 7 and 8, then he, that is referring to Adonijah, conferred with Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and with Abiathar the priest, and they followed and helped Adonijah. So we confirm that Rebecca's 100% correct in what she stated. These guys switched their allegiance in this treasonous effort of Adonijah all these years with the king. And now they're no longer standing with him. But if you look on in verse 8 of chapter 1, on the contrary, Zadok the priest, Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, who's also the chief priest, Nathan the prophet, we kind of expect that, strangely, Shimei, Ray, and the mighty men who belonged to David were not with Adonijah. So not everyone goes over in this effort, but two very important power players. The priest named Abiathar, and of all people, Joab, the king's faithful, anything but probably, his commander-in-chief of the armed forces anyway, the commander of the armies, he switches over and becomes a part of this rebellious effort. So we go back to chapter 2, and in verse 22, when Solomon answers to his mother and he says, "Why are you asking this thing? Do you not realize the significance between this?" And I guess I probably should have gotten there by this point, but if you'll let me skip ahead just a slide here, we'll make mention of this very fact that the wisdom of Solomon begins to be on full display. And he shows that he's very sharp when it comes to politics. And he's even already starting to see things. Now think about this. His mom's been in this kind of arena now for how long? And I don't think she at all recognizes the significance of what's going on. But he sees through this. God is already blessing this young man incredibly. And we know that David spent some time in trying to prepare and groom him for the throne, and that's probably a help too. He says, "Mom, what this is another attempt to overthrow my rule that God has given to me and really to you. You might as well ask the kingdom also." And in addition to that, you're asking it for Abiathar the priest, who you know you can't count on now. You're asking it for Joab the son of Zeruiah, who just kind of goes with the wind. Verse 23, "Then King Solomon swore by the Lord, saying, 'May God do so to me and more also, if Adonijah has not spoken this word against his own life. Now therefore, as the Lord lives, who has confirmed me and set me on the throne of David my father, and who has established a house for me as he promised, Adonijah,'" don't forget his brother, although half-brother, "'shall be put to death today.' So King Solomon sent by the hand of Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and he struck him down, and he died." You think it's a little herky-jerky on the part of Solomon? Do you think it might be a little extreme here, or you think this is the way to handle it? Yeah. And I think you can make a case, Rebecca, that there's been some weakness in the latter half of the previous king's reign, don't you think? As great of a king as David was, he's shown weakness, and some of these people probably should have already been dealt with who hadn't been. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Back in chapter 1, verses 11 and 12, if Adonijah were to ever be able to push through and get a hold of that throne, what would that mean for Solomon and for his mother? Look back in chapter 1, verses 11 and 12. "Nathan the prophet spoke to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, saying, 'Have you not heard that Adonijah, the son of Haggith, has become king?'" At least he names himself king. "And David our Lord, when he's still alive, does not know it? Come, please, let me now give you advice that you may save your own life and the life of your son Solomon." I believe there's a strong case to be made that what Solomon does here in part is out of self-defense. It's either he lives or his brother lives. It's one or the other. And God's already said, I want you to live and be the king of Israel. So to do what the Lord has stated, he has to take care of this matter. Now the other side of it is this. The first time he tries to overthrow the kingdom, do you know of anyone 3,000 years ago in a monarchy period who's going to survive the experience, who has put forth a legitimate effort to try to take down the king in waiting? Really? Yet, verse 52 of chapter 1, Solomon had said, all right, I'll give him a second shot. He's hanging on to the horns of the altar, the power of forgiveness. And I think this shows, remember, he's set up to be a type of Jesus. And he says, all right, I'll give you another shot. Yeah, I'm willing to forgive. I'm willing to start over. But he says, you're going to have to prove yourself as a worthy person. I expect something out of you. And if you prove yourself that, not a single hair of you shall fall. But if wickedness is found in you, then you're going to die. He gave the warning before. I think that is more than fair in this time. Unfortunately, his brother does not heed that warning. So he executes him. He puts him to death. It's either his life and that of his mother's or of his evil stepbrother, and he chooses the life of his mother and of himself. Yeah, a little bit. A little bit. Scar's not very pretty, though, so I don't know. Yeah. Right. Yeah, you're right. And in all fairness, he should be dumb right here, but he's not, even though he's young. And the reason is he has his trust in the right place. He's been looking to God for guidance and for blessing. He's a humble heart. I have no doubt he's been closely watching his father and the good things he's seen and probably some of the not so good things that he doesn't want to emulate. And, it's a real testament to him. Even though his brother is older, he's obviously wiser than what his brother is. He's not going to be able to pull this one past him. Thank you, Rebecca. Verse 26, and to Abiathar the priest. Okay, so just a reminder here. What's this guy's role recently, Abiathar the priest? We know from chapter 1, what did he recently do? He switched sides whenever Adonijah came onto the scene. He said, yeah, I'll help you become king instead of your father, David. And also, undoubtedly, when he knows Solomon's supposed to be the next one. Not good. So the king said to him, go to Anathoth. And I do want to put up a map here, not because you're going to find Anathoth on the screen, but because whenever you spot Jerusalem and you know where that is, you can see that on the map. It's just a suburb that's about 3 miles outside of Jerusalem. Anathoth is, and it's actually the hometown of the prophet Jeremiah, just a note of interest. So just right around Jerusalem in that area, he says, go to Anathoth, to the suburb of Jerusalem, to your own fields, for you are deserving of death. But, we're sensing a theme here in Solomon's rule. I will not put you to death at this time, because you carried the ark of the Lord God before my father David, and because you were afflicted every time my father was afflicted. Remember, he stayed with David through all those difficult years and the attempted overthrow under the other son, Absalom. Unfortunately, the second time he didn't, but I think he shows tremendous graciousness right here. And basically says, I'm going to give you another chance also. But I think it's a little bit of a warning, kind of like the other. You'd better be wise about it and prove yourself. So Solomon removed Abiathar from being priest to the Lord, that he might fulfill the word of the Lord, which he spoke concerning the house of Eli at Shiloh. I wish we had more time for that. I told you there's a lot of history in tonight's lesson. For cross-reference, if you're interested in this goes back to 1 Samuel chapter 2 and the latter end of it. 1 Samuel chapter 2. Part of the punishment on Eli's house is that he says, God does, speaking to him, when the time comes, I will strip the priesthood from your descendants, and they're not going to be serving before the throne, the crown, any longer. This is the fulfillment of that. And time-wise, we're looking at least 100, somewhere maybe even between 100 and 200 years prior to this prophecy is given. God's mind something, isn't it? He knows how to set everything up in place. He knows when this is going to happen, and he speaks it then. It's not now. It's going to be down the road. But the high priesthood is going to be taken from you, and certainly that does take place, is fulfilled through Abiathar because of his treason. So verse 28, then news came to Joab. Just a reminder. Now we know what Joab's done in the past and how he's been the commander of David's armies. David, of course, is deceased. A little more recently, though, chapter 1 of 1 Kings. In what activity has Joab been engaged? Treason, right alongside Abiathar the priest. Well, news came to Joab, and he probably thinks, uh-oh, he might finally actually have to answer to somebody. For some reason, the king just never really seemed to hold him accountable, David. But the new king seems to be handling things differently. News came to Joab, for Joab had defected to Adonijah, and we're reminded, though he had not defected to Absalom. So Joab fled to the tabernacle of the Lord, and he took hold of the horns of the altar. Why do you think he does that? Worked for Adonijah just a little bit ago. Okay, so he's going to the place where sacrifices are given and forgiveness from God comes out, where mercy, flows out of this place, and grabs hold of the horn, symbolic of power, and he's seeking the power of Solomon's forgiveness. He's hoping, well, maybe it'll work like it did with Adonijah the first time. And King Solomon was told, Joab has fled to the tabernacle of the Lord. There he is, by the altar. Then Solomon sent Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, saying, go strike him down. So Benaiah went to the tabernacle of the Lord and said to him, thus says the king, come out, let's talk about something. And he said, no thanks, I'm good. But he knows what's coming. He says, I'll just die right here. Well, at the end of the verse, Benaiah brought back word to the king, saying, thus said Joab, and thus he answered me. Then the king said to him, okay, do as he said. Strike him down and bury him, that you may take away from me and from the house of my father the innocent blood which Joab shed. Why do you think there would be a hesitancy just to kill someone who's at the altar and has a hold of the horns? It could be, and it might be one of those things like we're taught later, hey, God's going to forgive you as you forgive. And if you're doing that in the very place where the forgiveness of God, now we know not in fulfillment, right, but in typification where the forgiveness of God is obtained, that would be a little bit intimidating to do that in that spot, Rebecca. I think so. But the second thing is this. What kind of blood comes into contact with that altar? 100% of the time. What type of blood? Well, animal, good, right? There you go, sacrificial, innocent blood. What do you think happens if the blood of Joab hits that altar? That's different, okay? Maybe the world stops spinning, okay? Maybe the sun goes black for 3, that could be a pretty big deal. And there could be some concern there of contaminating the pure altar of the Lord where only sinless blood usually touches. That could be part of it. Although, God in His wisdom, He always has things figured out ahead of time. I want you to turn to the book of Exodus. Exodus chapter 21. I know our time's running short, but it's just one verse here. This is a really important one. Exodus 21. Let's read together in verse number 14. But if a man willfully attacks another to kill him by cunning, pause. Any application to Joab? 2 different times. The commander of Israel's army in Abner, and then also the commander of Judah's army in Amasa, once he's replaced as Judah's commander. So he's done this 2 different times, in times of peace, not war. If a man willingly attacks another to kill him by cunning, you shall take him from my altar, God says, that he may die. So it sounds like there's some custom that's involved here, kind of like the cities of refuge, in a move of desperation. Where's the altar? Hurry and run, and you tag it, and you get on base, and no one can touch it. Well, God has rules built in for that. Listen, if there's someone who essentially has committed premeditated murder, the symbolism of hanging on to a piece of furniture should not save their life. All right, so God's already dealt with that. And what He does here isn't appropriate. He tries to take him away from it. He won't. And so, of course, he has to take care of matters as the man requests. So, back in verse 32 of 1 Kings 2. So the Lord will return His blood on His head because He struck down 2 men more righteous and better than he. And I think you can make a case at least one of those was not a very good man, really, at all. But it doesn't say a whole lot about Joab. He killed them with the sword, Abner the son of Ner, the commander of the army of the Lord, and Amasa the son of Jether, the commander of the army of Judah. Though my father David did not know it," of course he knows after the fact that it happens, but he had no part in the planning of it. "Their blood shall therefore return upon the head of Joab and upon the head of his descendants forever, but upon David and his descendants, upon his house and his throne, there shall be peace forever from the Lord." So Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, you think Benaiah may have become a trusted comrade of King Solomon? He's sending him as the executioner on all of these missions. "He went up and struck and killed him, and he was buried in his own house in the wilderness." And as far as the wilderness, that might not sound good, but the fact that it's his own house, this is actually an action of honor right here. They do the same thing the Israelites do with Samuel, the great prophet. They bury him in his own house. And so even in his death, I think Solomon is actually very gracious to Joab. It's not something where he burns his body or leaves it out for the animals, but he gives him a very respectful burial and at his own home place. "The king put Benaiah," makes a lot of sense, "the son of Jehoiada, in his place over the army." Okay, so he's going to become the commander of the armed forces. "And the king put Zadok the priest in the place of Abiathar," two people who can actually be trusted. You go back to chapter 1, two people who held true in the attempted overthrow of Adonijah. Okay, verse 36, one last one to discuss quickly here. "Then the king sent and called for Shimei." Who's that guy? His name always stands out to me. Shimei. Good. Okay, excellent. So he's just rubbing his nose in the dirt, with his words. That's a capital offense according to God's law, to slander a ruler of God's own people, the chosen of the Lord in that way. And the sons of Zeruiah, guess what they want to do? Well, would be glad to oblige. And so they want to kill him. But David says, "Hey, look, I think he's still reflecting on his own sins, and so a lot of the things he's saying may be very well true of me and how God looks at me right now." And so, but he makes a commitment. He gives an oath that he won't kill him personally, but he reminds his son prior to his death, "You didn't make that same oath that I did. I'll let you mull on that and see what it is that you think you ought to do." The king's very gracious to him. He says, "Build yourself a house in Jerusalem, dwell there, but do not go out from there anywhere. For it shall be when you go out in the day and cross the brook Kidron, know for certain you shall surely die, your blood shall be on your own head." And Shimei said to the king, "The saying is good, I agree. As my lord the king has said, so your servant will do." So Shimei dwelt in Jerusalem many days. But it happened at the end of 3 years. The two slaves of Shimei ran away to Achish, the son of Maacah, the king of Gath. And they told Shimei, saying, "Look, your slaves are in Gath." And if you look on the map, Gath isn't listed, but that's in the territory of the Philistines, okay, on the southeastern portion of the Mediterranean seaboard. And he obviously has to leave Jerusalem to go get his slaves back. He does that, saddles his donkeys, goes to Achish at Gath, and he brings his slaves back. Solomon's told that Shimei had gone from Jerusalem to Gath. And the king sent and called for Shimei and said, "Did I not make you swear by the Lord and warn you, saying, know for certain that on the day you go out and travel anywhere you shall surely die? And you said to me, the word I have heard is good. Why then have you not kept the oath of the Lord and the commandment that I gave you?" The king said moreover to Shimei, "You know as your heart acknowledges all the wickedness that you did to my father David. Therefore the Lord will return your wickedness on your own head. But King Solomon shall be blessed, and the throne of David shall be established before the Lord forever." So the king commanded Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and he went out and struck him down, and he died. Thus the kingdom was established in the hand of Solomon. I want to read verse 1 as we close. Now Solomon made a treaty, of chapter 3 that is. Now Solomon made a treaty with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married Pharaoh's daughter. Then he brought her to the city of David until he had finished building his own house and the house of the Lord and the wall all around Jerusalem. If you want to look at the king as some type of warrior, I think you could say that the king has strong armor right now. It's a little bloody, but he has some strong armor. Could it be that in verse 1 of chapter 3, we begin to see the first chink in the king's armor? That's something for which we'll watch in the coming weeks. For our next class period, if you will, please read all of chapter 3, all of the third chapter. Let's do for memory work, good stuff. It's found at number 13. I think I'll give you 3:13. And Shelby, I'll even have it printed in the bulletin right. It'll match what it is that I've said tonight. Any closing comments as we do take a little break? Okay, thank you.